It is a little before sunrise, sometime around 1350 BCE, and you are already on your knees. The house is still dark. A clay oven waits in the next room. The grain in front of you has already been dampened, pounded, dried, and sieved. Now comes the slow part. You place a handful of emmer wheat on a long stone. You grip a smaller stone with both hands, lean your weight forward, and push. Then you pull it back. Push, pull, push, pull. The sound is low and rough, like stone breathing against stone. Fine dust gathers around your fingers. Your shoulders warm first, then your lower back, then the familiar pressure in your knees and toes. There is a child nearby. There may be water to collect, clothes to wash, a floor to sweep, and an oven to heat before the day becomes unbearable. But none of that changes what is in front of you. If the grain is not ground, there is no flour. If there is no flour, there is no bread. And if there is no bread, the household does not eat. There is no powered mill, no bag of flour waiting at a shop, no machine to perform the same movement thousands of times in your place. There is only the stone, the grain, and your body. So how much of that body does one loaf of bread cost? Because hidden inside this ordinary morning are several pieces of evidence that change the way ancient Egypt looks. A wooden model of a woman bent so far forward that her arms almost disappear beneath her shoulders. A workers' village where grinding stations were built into nearly every excavated house. 2 female skeletons with some of the worst knee damage found in their community. A word for a female servant connected to the act of grinding, and bread containing mineral particles hard enough to wear through human enamel. By the end, the most surprising part may not be that this work hurt. It may be that an entire civilization depended on the people doing it, while giving the work almost no prestige at all. When people picture food in ancient Egypt, the image is usually generous. Painted tables bend under loaves, fruit, meat, jars of beer, and baskets of grain. Tomb walls show orderly workshops. Museum cases contain small figures of bakers, brewers, and millers frozen in the middle of their tasks. The figures look peaceful because stone is peaceful once nobody has to move it. But the real activity was repetitive, noisy, dusty, and urgent. Bread was not a decorative addition to Egyptian life. It was one of its foundations. Bread and beer fed households, supplied temples, and formed part of the compensation given to workers. Grain was stored, counted, distributed, owed, and worried about. The state could move stone because someone first turned grain into food, and turning grain into food was not a single task. The main wheat used through much of pharaonic Egypt was emmer. It is a stubborn grain. Its edible kernel sits tightly enclosed inside protective material called chaff and glooms. Storing it that way helped protect it from insects, but it also meant the grain could not simply be poured onto a stone and turned into flour. First, a woman might pound the spikelets in a mortar with a little water to help release the grain. Then the material had to dry. It had to be sieved so the larger pieces of chaff could be removed. Only then could the cleaner grain go to the grinding stone. After grinding came mixing, kneading, shaping, heating the oven, and baking. In some New Kingdom houses, the oven was a tall clay-lined structure insulated with mud. A fire heated the interior. When the flames died down, dough could be placed against the hot inner surface. What we call making bread was really a chain of labor. Break one link, and the meal disappeared. But one step in that chain was marked out with unusual consistency. Grinding belonged to women. Ancient Egyptian art does not give us a complete census of labor. Tomb scenes were created for particular purposes, usually for elites, and they cannot tell us exactly what happened in every household over 3,000 years. But the pattern is still difficult to ignore. Men and women appear in several stages of large-scale baking and brewing. Men pound grain, mix dough, tend ovens, and work around vats. Women can appear in those stages too. But when the grain is placed on a saddle quern and pushed back and forth into flour, the workers shown are overwhelmingly female. One Middle Kingdom model from the tomb of Mikater lays out an entire bakery and brewery as a miniature workshop. Men pound grain, men work dough and tend the ovens. But the figures leaning over the grinding stones are women. Another small model, now in the Grand Egyptian Museum, reduces the entire posture to a single frozen body. A woman kneels with her knees together. Her toes touch the ground. Her upper body bends forward. Her arms reach toward a handstone that is now missing. The tool is gone. The position remains. Texts reinforce the same association. Egyptian writings place maidservants at millstones. One word used for a female servant appears to be connected with the same linguistic root as grinding. In a literary description of the world turned upside down, elite women are humiliated by being forced into work associated with servants, including labor at the quern. The message is not subtle. Grinding was essential. Grinding was female, and grinding was low status. That combination matters because the task was not quick. Modern experiments have produced different estimates, and we should not pretend there was one universal schedule. The time depended on the grain, the tool, the amount of food required, and the skill of the person doing the work. One experimental estimate suggests roughly 2 hours to grind about 1.2 kilograms of emmer and around 3 hours for 2 kilograms. Another published estimate runs as high as 7 or 8 hours for a household's daily flour. Those figures vary too widely to claim that every Egyptian woman spent exactly 8 hours at a stone. But they point in the same direction. Grinding could consume a substantial part of the day, and the older version of the tool forced the body into a particularly demanding position. A saddle quern is not a rotating mill. The lower stone is long and slightly hollowed by use. Grain rests on its surface. The worker presses a smaller handstone forward and backward across it. In Old Kingdom images, the quern often lies directly on the floor. The woman kneels behind it, bends over, and extends her arms. Her weight moves through her knees, toes, lower back, shoulders, and wrists. The motion is symmetrical and repeated again and again. Later, some households raised the quern on a mud brick or wooden installation and set it at an angle. That change sounds small, but experimentally and mechanically it makes sense. Raising the work surface reduces how far the body must bend and can relieve some of the pressure on the back, knees, and toes. It may also make grinding faster. At the walled workers' settlement near Amarna, archaeologists identified grinding installations in 33 of 37 examined houses. At Deir el-Medina, the village of royal tomb workers, only 8 of 68 houses were recorded with comparable structures. That difference does not have a simple explanation. Families may have preferred different tools. Portable querns may have left less obvious traces. Some households may have shared installations. Some women may have ground grain outside their own homes or relied on lower status workers assigned to the task. But the installations reveal something important. People understood that the position of the stone changed the experience of the body. A raised, sloping surface was not a machine, but it was an ergonomic improvement thousands of years before anyone used that word. And now we reach the bones. This is where the story becomes tempting and where it also becomes dangerous to overstate. At Deir el-Medina, a study of the human remains identified 2 female skeletons with severe damage to the knee joints. According to the archaeological discussion, this was the most extensive joint damage recorded for either sex in that particular assemblage. The researcher suggested that long periods of grinding grain may have contributed to it. May have. A skeleton does not arrive with a job title. Knee damage can have more than one cause. Age, injury, other forms of kneeling, carrying, genetics, and a lifetime of different tasks can all leave marks. We cannot point to one ancient woman and reconstruct every morning of her life from a damaged joint. But bones can preserve patterns of stress, and comparison helps. At the much earlier farming settlement of Abu Hurira in what is now Syria, researchers associated a cluster of skeletal changes with prolonged kneeling and grain grinding. These included degeneration in knees, arthritic big toes, damage near the lower spine, and symmetrical development in the muscles used to push a handstone. Abu Huraira was not Egypt, and those findings cannot simply be transferred from one society to another. But the mechanics are comparable. Put a body in the same demanding posture for hours, repeat the same force with both arms, and certain joints carry the cost. When the Egyptian art, the grinding installations, the experimental work, the gendered texts, and the damaged knees are placed beside one another, the interpretation becomes plausible. Not every woman was crippled by a quern. Not every painful joint came from flour. But the work created a real physical burden, and much of that burden was assigned according to gender and status. This changes the question. The issue is not only whether bread damaged women's bodies, it is which women were expected to absorb the damage. Elite women did not necessarily kneel over a household stone every morning. Wealth creates distance between a person and the most repetitive parts of survival. Tomb art often shows grinding women in plain clothing, sometimes with covered hair, and sometimes represented as older or less idealized than elite female figures. At Deir el-Medina, administrative records assigned workers a certain number of labor days from state-supplied women described by scholars as servants or possibly enslaved workers. Their exact duties are not always recorded. Researchers have proposed that grinding grain for workers' families may have been one of their principal tasks. If that interpretation is correct, the quern was not simply a symbol of women's work. It marked a hierarchy among women. The household still needed flour. A woman with enough status could transfer the worst part of the process to someone with less power. The pain did not disappear, it moved downward, and it may have started early. Children did not exist in a separate protected world, while adult labor happens somewhere else. One remarkable Old Kingdom sculpture in the Metropolitan Museum shows a nursing woman with 2 children. Museum researchers note that scenes from the period also show a child clinging to a mother's back while she grinds grain, and another woman nursing while tending bread. The image is familiar for a reason. Childcare and food production occupied the same room, the same hours, and often the same body. A girl could watch the movement before she was strong enough to perform it. At some point she could help. Skill made the work faster, and speed mattered when the household needed food every day. The gesture passed from one generation to the next without requiring a written manual. Push, pull, sweep the flour aside, add more grain. There is another twist in this story, because the stone did not only affect the person using it, it entered the bread. Ancient Egyptian teeth are often heavily worn. This was not primarily the pattern produced by a modern diet full of refined sugar. It was physical abrasion. Bread samples and dental research indicate that flour could contain husk fragments and tiny mineral particles. Limestone tools could shed grit during pounding and grinding. Windblown sand could enter food during preparation and baking. Sieves removed larger contaminants, but the finest abrasive material could remain. One analysis of ancient bread identified minerals including quartz. Quartz is much harder than tooth enamel, so every meal could carry a microscopic grinding stone of its own. Tooth meets grit. Enamel wears. The softer dentine beneath it becomes exposed. If wear reaches the pulp chamber, bacteria gain access to living tissue. The tooth dies. Pus builds around the root. Pressure finds a path through the jawbone. An abscess can produce pain severe enough to dominate every waking hour. Without reliable extraction, drainage, antibiotics, or modern infection control, it could persist, spread, and in some cases become life-threatening. Ancient Egyptian medical texts contain treatments for dental problems, and a small number of people carried titles translated as dentist. But physical evidence for effective routine dental intervention is surprisingly limited and debated. The food keeping the population alive could also slowly wear away the population's teeth. And once again, the burden was unequal but widely shared. The woman at the quern absorbed the strain of production. The entire household absorbed the grit of consumption. Her shoulders moved the stone, but the stone reached everyone at the table. That sounds like a story with a villain, but bread is not the villain. Bread made life possible. It was portable energy in a landscape organized around agriculture and labor. It could feed a child, provision a worker, supply a temple, and serve as part of a wage. The flour produced in one room traveled into fields, workshops, building sites, and tombs. The person making it could affect lives far beyond the walls of her house. The work may also have created spaces of knowledge and community. At Amarna, many grinding installations were located in front rooms near the street. Archaeologists have suggested that this arrangement may have allowed women to work close to neighbors, share resources, talk, teach, and divide tasks. Comparative evidence from other societies shows that group grinding could transform an isolating chore into a social activity. We cannot recover the conversations. But we should not imagine the women as silent machines. They possessed skill. They knew the sound of grain at different stages. They knew how much pressure the stone needed, how fine the flour had become, how the dough responded to water, and when the oven was ready. A badly ground batch wasted time and food. A good one kept a household functioning. The contradiction is the heart of the story. Grinding was skilled but treated as menial. It was indispensable but poorly rewarded. It sustained the public achievements of Egypt while remaining hidden inside the household. It belonged to women, and within that category it could be pushed towards servants, enslaved workers, and girls with the least ability to refuse. So did one daily chore destroy ancient Egyptian women's bodies? Not in the simple way the title might suggest. Archaeology does not permit us to diagnose every grinder or blame every damaged knee on one tool. But it does reveal a system that repeatedly placed female bodies into a stressful position because the household and the state required flour. The artistic pattern is strong. The labor was time-consuming. The mechanics placed strain on predictable joints. A small number of Egyptian skeletons show injuries consistent with the hypothesis, while comparative populations demonstrate what long-term grinding can do. The dental evidence shows that the consequences of stone processing continued after the loaf left the oven. That is more unsettling than a single dramatic injury. It is damage measured in repetition. One push does nothing. One morning changes nothing. But there is another meal tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Now return to the dark room near Amarna. The sun has risen. The oven is hot. The first loaves are ready. A child reaches for food. Someone carries bread out of the house to work. The stone rests for a moment with flour caught in its worn surface. The woman who moved it may never appear by name in a royal inscription. No monument records the number of mornings she knelt there. What survives is indirect. A grinding installation in a ruined house, a servant figure in a tomb, a line in a text, an injured joint, a tooth worn to the pulp. Ancient Egypt raised stone toward the sky, and we built our image of the civilization from what remained standing. But every morning, in houses almost entirely lost, other stones moved forward and backward across the floor. Those stones did not build monuments. They built breakfast. And without them, almost nothing else in Egypt could begin. So you can give the woman at the grinding stone one modern gift. A mechanical mill that saves her knees and keeps grit out of the flour. Or a dentist who can finally stop the pain. Which one do you choose? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the hidden lives of ancient women.